So give us the boring Epstein files, publish all the uninteresting footage you clipped out of those videos from Epstein's cell block. And whatever donors or intelligence assets are being protected here, they're not that important. Like, the number one way to guarantee that I keep talking about something is to yell at me to stop talking about it.
So recently, Matt Walsh had a podcast where he talks about the need to keep clamoring to the federal government and the Trump administration to come clean on the Epstein files, despite what has become an obvious cover-up. Now, I just thought this response was so interesting because his coworker, Ben Shapiro, could not have responded to this in a more different way, saying, you know, this is just a conspiracy theory that people are drumming up now, that there's something behind the curtain here. So let's get Matt's take on this. Please like the video and subscribe to the channel.
In every single criminal trial in this country, whether the crime is petty theft or murder or anything in between, there are very clear standards that deal with video evidence. And in particular, if the government wants to introduce video evidence, they have to provide all of the available footage that they have. That's a pretty intuitive concept. So if somebody robs a convenience store and police recover surveillance tapes from the store, then they need to turn those tapes over to the defense. The prosecution cannot modify the tapes in any way. They can't splice together different tapes. They certainly can't delete anything. They have to provide the raw, unedited footage to the defense team. And on top of that, they have to verify that the tapes are authentic and they haven't been tampered with by establishing a sworn chain of custody. This is, about as basic as it gets. Every judge in the country, even Ketanji Brown Jackson, I bet, can grasp this very straightforward concept. You can easily get a case thrown out of traffic court if they won't give you all of the relevant footage that they have. Or, of course, if they give you footage that's been doctored in some way. On the other hand, when it comes to the single most watched sex trafficking case in the history of the United States, this rule apparently doesn't apply.
Just imagine that, man. That says it all. The double standard for this, a sex trafficking ring involving the most powerful people in government, in the legal world, in the entrepreneurial world, but we just throw out the rules for those people, and that's what's come to be true here. There's nothing to see. We hyped up the Epstein files, but now we're not going to come clean on what even my administration's officials said about them and their review of them. No matter, that we already implied it when we handed out to conservative influencers binders that said Epstein Files Phase 1, that there would be a Phase 2, going back on all previous statements. So, yeah.
You can forget all about chain of custody, and you can forget about obtaining raw footage as well. Instead, in the case of Jeffrey Epstein, the DOJ produced a video that was clearly manipulated. As we discussed previously, Wired magazine found that the footage from outside Epstein's jail cell, which the DOJ claimed was raw footage, had actually been edited and saved multiple times back in May of this year. Specifically, quote, the file was assembled from at least 2 source clips, saved multiple times, exported, and then uploaded to the DOJ's website.
It was also found that there was not just a 1-minute gap in it, there was a 3-minute gap, and that was discovered days later in the footage that was released. It wasn't even in the location that they purported Epstein's cell itself to be in photos that were released shortly after his death in August of 2019, and other abnormalities here. It's striking to me and absurd to me that they even believed that people would actually buy this. Like, that's the thing that I can't believe the most about this video footage is, how would you put this video out, clearly doctored, edited, cut out 3 minutes of it, and believe that this is what the masses would buy? That this definitively shows that Epstein killed himself. It's just so stupid. Matt's right.
Additionally, viewers noticed that there was a glitch when the timer in the footage moved from 11:58 to 11:59 p.m. It seemed to jump ahead to midnight. None of this was initially explained or disclosed by the DOJ, which again referred to the footage as raw. Of course, the reason the DOJ claimed the footage was raw is that they understand, as most people do, that any edits for any reason would immediately raise a lot of questions.
Right.
There should be no need to save the file multiple times or to combine clips, to delete things. They could have just posted everything they had, raw footage, that's what that means, just here it is, and the public can sort it out from there. But the DOJ didn't do that. It's possible they were hoping that no one would look at the metadata or study the videos closely. And if that was the plan, it didn't last very long. After the footage was posted and Wired magazine noticed the problem, Pam Bondi had to come up with a justification for all of the discrepancies. And what she said ultimately is that the security system in the jail resets every night for around a minute.
She did say that, and she said that this goes back for decades, about to 1999, I believe she said in that press conference. But then it was after that that it was discovered that there was 2 more minutes cut out of this video, and I don't think we're going to get an explanation for that one. I hope I'm wrong. I hope that there is more information forthcoming, but it certainly doesn't seem like the Trump administration wants to do that. Now, Trump the other day did say, hey, Bondi can still release documents she thinks are credible, which itself is a turn face from his previous statement that, like, case closed. We didn't find anything. There was no blackmail. There's no clients. We released this memo. We had this press conference, and that's all on Jeffrey Epstein. That's what Bondi said. I think Trump's hearing from a lot of his top brass influencers like Matt, like Candace Owens, like Tucker Carlson, like Steve Bannon, saying that this response isn't acceptable and is trying to pivot a little bit from that. But I don't know that information is going to be forthcoming.
And therefore, we're told there was nothing nefarious about the missing footage. It's just a fact of life that in one of the most secure prisons in the country, we can't design a camera system that stays online 24/7. That's beyond our capacity. We can, land a man on the moon, but we can't prevent the cameras from shutting down every night just long enough to, maybe allow someone to get murdered. We also can't make sure that there's more than one functioning camera in the vicinity of this cell block. Now, already this was an unsatisfactory explanation. The DOJ didn't actually provide proof that the system needs to go offline for a minute every night. Bondi just claimed that it was normal, and we're all supposed to accept it. She also didn't say anything whatsoever about why the footage needed to be edited in the first place. Again, this would not fly in traffic court.
Yeah, again, they called this raw footage. And the perception is that raw footage isn't edited. It's not spliced together by two different programs. There's not a minute gap. There's not an additional 2-minute gap. It's raw footage, and that's what we would be expecting here. Now, even if we were given that, I don't know that would quell all skepticism toward this issue, because we would want to see footage from Epstein's cell. Now, they said that guards fell asleep and the cameras malfunctioned in various articles way back in 2019 about this. But then Kash Patel seemed to throw a wrench in that idea to some extent when he appeared on Rogan and said, hey, no, we have the footage. Maybe he was referring to this footage, this absurd footage they just gave us, but there does seem to be discrepancies in even that part of this story as well.
And it definitely doesn't pass muster when we're talking about Jeffrey Epstein, who had the potential to implicate the most powerful people in the world. And yet somehow the story just got much, much worse for Bondi and the DOJ. It turns out that even after they were exposed for hiding relevant information from the public about this tape, they still haven't come forward with the full story. So it falls on Wired Magazine, a small internet publication, to fill in even more details. And here's what they reported the other day. Quote, newly uncovered metadata reveals that nearly 3 minutes of footage were cut from the U.S. Department of Justice and Federal Bureau of Investigation, described as full raw surveillance video from the only functioning camera near Jeffrey Epstein's prison cell the night before he was found dead. Further analysis shows that one of the source clips was approximately 2 minutes and 53 seconds longer than the segment included in the final video, indicating that footage appears to have been trimmed before release. It's unclear what, if anything, the minutes cut from the first clip showed.
Well, there you have it. Matt's going to be called a conspiracy theorist because he points out what is, uncontroversially true about this video and what we're expected to swallow about it. He's going to be lumped into the same category. He'll be a conspiracy theorist. Some people will even call him anti-Semitic for this, right? Because, Epstein had connections to the Israeli government and Mossad. He'll be called all the names because of this. Clearly so.
Now, before we read on further in the article, there is just simply no way to justify this. It doesn't matter if the extra 2 minutes and 53 seconds, were irrelevant. It doesn't matter if those extra 2 minutes and 53 seconds were duplicated in another video file. In this case, and in every other case, the duty of the government is to be transparent. It's not to save people a very small amount of time when they're watching an hour's worth of video footage. Any government that's functioning properly would understand this calculation immediately. Just give people all of the information that you have and let them sort it out.
Right. That's the thing here, too, is that Trump's calling this a Democratic hoax now, right? This is the Epstein Files themselves, after his subordinates kind of trumped this up, pardon the pun, and said that, Trump would come into the White House and into the presidency with a, North Star of transparency and provide transparency in the Epstein case. And, but now the Epstein Files are just a Democratic hoax cooked up by crooked Hillary, said Obama, who wasn't even in office before this investigation began. And, he's likening it to Russiagate, which was indeed a hoax. It was absurd to think that Trump's a Russian agent, and it still continues to be absurd as he says, I'm rearming Ukraine with more weapons, by the way. But that's besides the point. If it really was a hoax, reveal this information and let your base, which, presumably you think is smart and supports you and you're grateful for, to sift through the absurdities like we did in the Russiagate scandal and determine, this is a hoax or not. It doesn't even make sense that it was a hoax if they doctored documents that they weren't even going to release during the Biden administration. That whole thing is so insane.
The article continues, quote, the nearly 3-minute discrepancy may be related to the widely reported 1-minute gap between 11:58 and 58 seconds p.m. and 12 a.m. that Attorney General Pam Bondi has attributed to a nightly system reset. The metadata confirms that the first video file, which showed footage from August 9th, 2019, continued for several minutes beyond what appears in the final version of the video. It was trimmed to the 11:58 p.m. Mark right before the jump to midnight. The cut to the first clip doesn't necessarily mean that there is additional time unaccounted for. The second clip picks up at midnight, which suggests the two would overlap. Nor does it prove that that the missing minute was cut from the video. Close quote. In other words, we can't say definitively what's in the 3 minutes of footage that were cut. It's possible there's nothing of interest, but there's one way the government could provide some more clarity. They could simply dump all the files on the DOJ's website without any editing whatsoever.
Yeah, why make people wonder? I mean, even the appearance of, wondering what the explanation is a bad thing for this administration. It could be innocuous, whatever. But rectify this by providing the raw footage, as you told us we were getting in the first place. That's how to provide a solution here. That's the panacea in this regard. I'm not saying that will answer all the Epstein questions. Clearly it won't, because that doesn't touch, who his associates were, what intelligence service or services he was connected to, how he made all of his wealth in the first place, which is absurd and ambiguous to begin with. But that would provide more clarity for a lot of people questioning specifically this video footage, to be sure.
At the moment, no one in the Trump administration can come up with a coherent justification for why this hasn't been done. They also can't explain why they haven't released phase 2 of the Epstein Files, which was originally planned, or the truckload of documents that Pam Bondi said the DOJ had recovered in the last few months from the Southern District of New York. She says there are graphic depictions of children on the videos that she can't release, but she hasn't said anything at all about any of the documents beyond telling us that they're apparently not important.
I just want to provide one clarification. At first, when she was talking about those videos, she said that they had thousands of videos of Epstein molesting children. And then she spun that in the press conference to say, nope, that was just child porn he downloaded. Well, how do you confuse those two? That itself is a discrepancy I think is worth at least some coverage. And if not, why don't you have people document who the individuals that they could determine were in those videos and at least have that? No one asked for that to be released to the public, by the way. No one of repute wants that to be released, even though Bondi acted like, oh, people were asking for that in the press conference. She goes, that will never be released to the public. Good. That should never be released to the public, but we still want answers about what is on those tapes. And you changed the narrative about those tapes in the first place. And by the way, we know Epstein had a safe in his house that was found with digital media printed on it with names of prominent people on it. This is known. This was documented way back under the original investigation. And this was widely reported in the media, by the way. So there you have it.
Which is different from what she initially said. Nor has she unsealed the search warrants or financial disclosures in the case. Instead of getting any transparency here, the Trump administration is continuing to tell us that these materials are boring and that we shouldn't care about them. Here's how the president put it yesterday. Listen.
I know you've urged people to move on, but I'm curious, why do you think your supporters in particular have been so interested in the Epstein story and so upset about how it's been handled?
I don't understand it. Why they would be so interested. He's dead for a long time. He was never a big factor in terms of life. I don't understand what the interest or what the fascination is. I really don't. And the credible information's been given. Don't forget, we went through years of the Mueller witch hunt and all of the different things, the Steele dossier, which was all fake. All that information was fake. But I don't understand why the Jeffrey Epstein case would be of interest to anybody. It's pretty boring stuff. It's sordid, but it's boring. And I don't understand why it keeps going. I think really only pretty bad people, including fake news, want to keep something like that going. But credible information, let them give it. Anything that's credible, I would say let them have it.
Now, and by the way, just this morning, he lashed out again on Truth Social, attacking anyone who's still asking about Epstein as weaklings and saying that he doesn't want their support anymore.
Just think about that. This is Trump calling his supporters weaklings, many of which probably supported him because, you know, he was thought to have brought about transparency in this case. He went on Lex Fridman's show during the campaign and said, hey, not only will I look at releasing those, his subordinates talked about it constantly. Trump also said on Lex Fridman, hey, a lot of prominent people of power went to that island, and it's really ghastly. Something like that, I'm summarizing. But fortunately, I was not one of them. He said that verbatim. So he made this a campaign issue. He did, and his administration, and he used his discretion to place those people that talked about transparency in the Epstein case in his administration. He did that with Pam Bondi, who talked about this. He did that with Kash Patel, the director of the FBI, who talked about this. He did that with Dan Bongino, the deputy director of the FBI, who talked about this. And now he's going to call his supporters that wanted clarity in this case and their skepticism about Epstein's connections to be, you know, at least answered in kind, earnestly and candidly and openly when it never had been before. He's going to say he doesn't want their support anymore. Just think about that. It's absolutely crazy that Trump's supporters can defend this. And to be clear, I want to say, I want to commend a lot of them are not taking this to be an appropriate answer. Matt's one of them. So props, Matt.
And I know some people are annoyed at me for harping on this and criticizing the president, who in many other ways is doing a fantastic job. But I happen to believe that bringing sex predators to justice is extremely important. And I just can't accept being blatantly gaslit by people in power, even if they're people that I otherwise support. In fact, especially if they're people I like. The number one way to guarantee that I keep talking about something is to yell at me to stop talking about it. First,
yeah, that's the right, I think, attitude in this case, is to say that, hey, you know, the way that you guys are responding to it, it's not even the issue itself at its core. It's your response to it that are giving people greater questions. And when you're telling them to shut up about it, you don't want their support, they're weaklings, that's the best way to guarantee that we need to talk about this. That is actually the lone signal that you could use as a prerequisite to determine what you should focus your attention on, as far as I'm concerned. I'm so glad that Matt grasps that, because Ben Shapiro clearly doesn't. His coworker is going in the completely different direction on this, saying, hey, nothing to see here. So apparently the Daily Wire is not just a hive mind. That's, I think, clear from these two reactions.
the personal attacks on anyone who asks questions, saying that they're bad people. It's always a winning argument. If you want to convince millions of skeptical people that their leaders are lying to them about their behavior, then the best approach is to mock them. Works every time. And in general, screaming at people to stop talking about something is, and I know this is the way that I work. And then there's the implication that the Epstein Files are boring. Well, in that case, release everything. Bore us to death. Go ahead. Then the story's over and everyone could go on with their lives. The 9/11 report was something like 600 pages. Parts of that document were boring. Almost nobody actually read the entire thing, but it was still very important that the 9/11 report was written. It's extremely confusing.
Yeah, there's still questions that remain about the 9/11 report. Obviously, it didn't exactly confront the reasons why Building 7 fell and some other things. But, let the Americans make their own judgments about how boring this is. That should be an immaterial aspect of this whole thing. The question is not over whether or not we should be entertained by this stuff. It's to get answers. whether it's boring or exciting, is completely irrelevant. That's a deflection. It's a classic deflection tactic. That's not even the whole core point of this whole thing, is to get answers about Epstein, his background, his associates, his connections to intelligence, etc. It's not to be entertained or bored. So again, Matt's right on that too.
To put it mildly, to see the President of the United States take the opposite position. He says he doesn't understand why people care about Jeffrey Epstein, as if that's some kind of moral failing on our part. Guess what? Why would anyone care about some of the most powerful people on the planet spending time on a sex trafficker's private island? Who could possibly be concerned about the possibility that a cabal of pedophiles and perverts are running entire countries and major corporations?
Yeah, he said it. And the blackmail that could come from that Epstein could leverage, especially if it was on behalf of a foreign government, by the way, to have dirt on politicians, their deepest, darkest secrets, to be able to bend them to your will. That's a very significant question, even outside of the ghastly nature of these vile, exploitative crimes. And both angles are very important here. And it doesn't seem like we're going to get answers right now from this administration on it.
This is where the comparison to Russiagate comes in. It's probably the worst part of the answer you just heard. Russiagate was a disaster for this country precisely because we didn't get the whole story. Russiagate was premised on lies and distortions at every stage. If Donald Trump made a joke at a rally, the media interpreted it as a coded message to Putin. They pretended that he had a secret computer in Trump Tower that was communicating with Moscow. They said that there was the P-tape. They claimed that Russian hackers were being housed at a non-existent Russian consulate in Miami. They claimed that Trump had weakened the GOP's platform on Russia, even though the opposite was true. When Hunter Biden dropped his laptop off at the repair store full of incriminating evidence about Joe Biden's influence peddling operation, the media blamed that on Russia too.
Yeah, absolutely. The whole Russiagate thing was a total scam, and Matt's right about this. That was a hoax. The Epstein Files is something that we know exists because of what your administration has said about it. And by the way, he's right about Trump actually strengthening the U.S. position adversarially toward Russia, even in his first term, sending $400 million worth of arms on it to Ukraine. Even though his original instincts were not to send it, he ultimately did it and caved. And then he still got impeached over it. And by the way, that mentality still continues today. He just decided to rearm Ukraine, keep the war going. He only cut off funding for about 6 or 7 days when Zelensky went into the White House that day, I believe in March. And then he restored it over this fruitless attempt for a ceasefire or a minerals deal, both of which were never going to work because Russia wants the same terms for a ceasefire that they do the end of the war. And the minerals deal would be dependent on mineral reserves that are in the Donbass that Russia occupies. So yeah, Matt's right here. Russiagate, Trump's position toward Russia is much more adversarial than the typical Democrat and corporate media shill wanted to make you believe.
On and on and on. So Russiagate was an utter fraud. And to the extent that it was successful, it worked because the media and the Obama administration repeatedly lied to us. They didn't give us information.
Yeah.
They lied to our faces for the better part of a decade.
And by Obama administration, I think he means the deep state under Obama, that a lot of which was holdovers into the Trump administration. Many of the most prominent people in power in the FBI did come from that administration. So I don't think he's misspeaking there. I think that's right.
With the Epstein situation, what we want is the opposite response from the media and the government. We want total transparency. At the end of his answer, Trump talks about filtering the documents so that we can only we only obtain credible information, but that's not the job of the government. Their job is to give us whatever information they have. Once they start assessing credibility, they give themselves a license to hide incriminating information. There's no reason to grant the government that license.
Absolutely. Thank you, Matt. Wow, this is probably the most I've ever agreed with Matt. He's so right about that, is once you say that it has to be credible to be released. Well, who determines if it's credible? It's always the people in power. It's always the government who naturally has things to hide from the public. And that's a bipartisan thing, by the way. That's the nature of prominence and power. That's the nature of political power in general. That's not limited to Trump. That's not limited to Biden. That's a systematic affair. People in power are most likely to not want to divulge things and are incentivized not to divulge things that could cast them in a bad light. That's our responsibility to sift through it and see whether we think it's credible or not.
No matter which political party is in charge. That's what makes the Democrats' sudden interest in the Epstein Files so galling and intolerable. They're obviously turning this into a dumb partisan issue when it isn't one. Like, there are those of us who just want to know. We want child sex predators and sex traffickers brought to justice. It's not a partisan issue. And we want that regardless of who's in power. And we talked about this a bit yesterday. All of a sudden, after years of complete disinterest in the entire topic, Democrats are suddenly clamoring for the release of the Epstein Files, or at least they're publicly pretending to want the Epstein Files to be released. Here's Adam Kinzinger.
Yeah, before we go there, I think he's mostly right about this. I hate to say, hey, I'm with them for transparency in the Epstein case now. It is opportunism for a lot of them. I even think a few of them, like Ro Khanna, this is a genuine concern for them. You know, maybe I'll have to go back and see if Khanna said anything about that in the Biden administration. But still, even if it is opportunism for them, it's the right thing to do to get to the bottom of these answers. So I'm not saying Matt's wrong. In fact, I generally agree with him because Democrats had really the silver bullet against Trump throughout the Biden administration if Trump was implicated in any of this, and it was to go after him on the Epstein case. Why? Well, the investigation actually started under his first administration, but they didn't do it. And I think that there's a plausible reason that they didn't do it, even if Trump was implicated in any way, which I have no reason to believe, actually. It's that they were implicated too. Their side was too, and if both sides are implicated, it doesn't benefit either side if you release all the information and, you know, all of your guys go down. This is the uniparty. This is the uniparty at work. So whether Trump's name is in the files and investigation, I think it's pretty conclusive that it would be. He was a good friend of Epstein's in the 90s and early 2000s until 2004 when they had a property dispute, but that's not to say he's implicated in any of the crimes. So I think that subject is something of a red herring too, whether his name appears there. I think that there's actually documentation that he cooperated personally with the investigation. I think even his lawyer said that. So that's where we're at.
For example, he's essentially a Democrat, of course. Quote, every, and I mean every Republican incumbent or candidate or even anyone thinking about running as a Republican for even dog catcher needs to be asked over and over and over about Epstein. This is a guy who's spent his only significant time in Congress, the only time people knew who he was, screeching hysterically about elderly women and a Q shaman walking around the Capitol building on January 6th. I mean, that was the issue he claimed to care about.
Yeah, that's true. It is opportunism. You know, I love how he had Slava Ukraini in his name, obviously, because Kinzinger is Ukraine first to the core. Certainly is. I also think it was kind of humorous how Howard Lutnick was standing beside Trump when he talked about the fact that, oh, hey, I can't believe anyone's interested in this whole Epstein thing still. I don't understand it. It's sordid, but it's boring. Well, Lutnick was the next door neighbor to Jeffrey Epstein in Manhattan. So I'm not saying that he's implicated in any of these crimes either, but it's just ironic that he's sitting there and laughing when Trump talks about the fake news here.
But no one actually cared about January 6th, so the whole plan backfired. So now that he's out of office, he's demanding that everybody talk about Epstein, an issue that he didn't care about until this week. It's not hard to see what's going on here. Neither party, Democrat or Republican, wants to see the full unredacted release of the Epstein Files, apparently. At a minimum, we can assume that top donors of both parties are implicated in some way. So they both want to neutralize this whole issue as quickly as they can.
I think he's exactly on the right page there. That's exactly the most plausible reasoning for the fact that both parties want to take a fire extinguisher to this fire that is the Epstein story.
For Democrats, that means turning the Epstein Files into yet another partisan football and turning into another, just a stunt. They're going to make performative efforts to release the files, even though they know that it will never work. For example, here's Axios' reporting from yesterday, quote, House Republicans on Tuesday voted down another Democratic procedural maneuver aimed at forcing the Justice Department to release documents related to Jeffrey Epstein. Democrats' procedural motion would have scuttled the GOP's legislative agenda for the day in favor of the bill, making it difficult for Republicans to vote for it. It came after Republicans on the House Rules Committee voted Monday night against attaching the Epstein language to a broader cryptocurrency and defense funding vote. And specifically, that broader cryptocurrency vote involved legislation that could have paved the way for a central bank digital currency, as well as restrictions on cryptocurrency ownership.
Yeah, that's an important thing that's being lost in this. Yeah, I would love a single issue resolution to come to the floor that says release the documents, but they're not trying to do that. They're playing political games to try to, get a CBDC and, or raise impeachment articles against Trump, whatever. I think that there's plausible reason for that, by the way, but that's not what's going to be able to get this done, to attaching it to bills that have the potential to be horrible for the Republicans and horrible for Americans in the terms of the CBDC, if you're asking me.
And whatever you think of this bill, although it seems to be a pretty terrible idea, the fact remains that it has nothing whatsoever to do with Jeffrey Epstein. So Democrats are using this whole issue to play very transparent political games. That's how seriously they take child sex trafficking, which is not at all. But ultimately, if we're being honest, the problem here still goes back to the White House. They've given the Democrats this opening by bungling the situation so badly.
Yeah, they have. I will add that Thomas Massie, the libertarian-leaning Republican from Kentucky, is trying to raise his own issue that isn't a political football, that isn't an attempt to, impeach Trump or bring about a CBDC. That's just a procedural vote to allow the release of the Epstein Files. We'll see how this separates the wheat from the chaff, who votes in favor of it and who doesn't. It requires some petitioning, and then for that to go to the floor, Candace Owens talked about it yesterday, that's a measure that we all support if you want to get to the bottom of this. Not the Democrats' attempt to attach this to another bill that it would just be horrible, like the cryptocurrency one that would bring about the CBDC. It's not what we want. That's the scariest prospect for the future.
The Trump administration seems mystified, or is acting that way, by the anger from the base. But number one, many of us were not saying anything different from what we've been saying for years about Epstein. Okay. And also what Trump has been saying for years about it. Now Trump has decided all of a sudden that the issue doesn't matter. It's boring. And anyone who talks about it is a weakling and not one of his supporters. He decided that in the last 2 weeks. He never said that before. So the idea that we as conservatives are obligated to just adopt that perspective out of the blue is madness. It's also not possible, by the way. Even if I wanted to just decide that I don't care about this anymore, it doesn't work that way. I can't. I can't just, you can't say to me, well, you shouldn't care about this. Okay, well, then I don't. Well, never mind.
Yeah, man, I am so glad that this is his perspective. He's exactly right about this. If it involves a child sex trafficking ring and exploiting young women is a cause you care about, and getting to the bottom of all the answers that still are lingering in this case, you can't just forget about that. You can't just be expected to follow the Pied Piper into the abyss over this and just change the narrative to suit whatever is convenient for Trump or whoever the president is. So yeah, again, props, Matt. This is an incredible response. I wish, everyone on that side of this would be talking this way. And he's being particularly hard on Trump in general, not just his subordinates, which is something that I haven't seen from a lot of the other conservative influencers. So this is awesome as far as I'm concerned. And hey, I've had lots of reasons to be critical of content from the Daily Wire, but this is not one of those reasons. This is great content from Matt.
If I wanted to obey that directive, I just can't. I care about the issue. I've cared about it for the last 5-6 years. I've cared about it the whole time. I still do. But I'm not interested in obeying that directive because I'm an American. I'm an American. I can think for myself. And if you're a person in position of power, I'm going to hold you accountable. I'm going to criticize you if you do something I don't like. I don't care what party you're in.
Yeah, man.
But the other thing, too, is that the Epstein scandal, and this is what has to be, you have to understand, is that the Epstein scandal is not happening in a vacuum. Okay? We have not seen any high-profile or powerful people held accountable for their crimes. No one's even been fired, let alone arrested, for allowing an assassin to almost kill Trump last year. Trump was elected in 2016 partly on a promise to lock her up. We all recall that. So when do we start locking people up?
Yeah, well said, man. We still don't know anything more about the near Trump assassination, the first one, other than that guy was in a BlackRock commercial. Apparently he had no social media attachments, no personal life, almost nothing. We know nothing about that. The second guy, that got memory hold down the window too, even though he published a self-published book that, talked about how heroic the fight in Ukraine was. He was apparently recruiting soldiers to fight in that war. And by the way, praising the Syrian Liberation Army. This guy was, insanely connected to the foreign policy apparatus that's the empire builders in some way, but we won't hear about that either. But yeah, Matt's right here. The only thing I'll correct him on to some extent, there was an attempt at prosecuting someone else close to Epstein other than Maxwell. His name was Jean-Luc Brunel. He actually committed suicide. He was, he kind of went into hiding after Epstein Scandal came to light in 2018, and he committed suicide before, we could get answers from that one. That's the only qualifier. He's right about every other, person that's attached to this. There's been really no prosecutions or any kind of, light shed upon that.
Trump himself has spent 10 years calling out many different crimes and scandals, rightly so. Just this past weekend, he was talking again about the rigged election in 2020. Why hasn't anyone been arrested or charged for any of this? What about the people who lied about the COVID shot? What about the people who funded the BLM riots in 2020? What about the cabal of unelected bureaucrats who were using Joe Biden's auto pen to sign pardons and executive orders, effectively seizing control of the federal government? No one is even being fired for any of this, let alone arrested for any of it. And that is the context that all of this is happening in, and a lot of us are just fed up with it.
Yeah, man, he said it. It's all those things wrapped up. And, Trump's going to make a little spectacle of the auto pen thing and kind of dance around it. I think he dismissed Comey's daughter. I don't know if that's related to the auto pen scandal. I need to look into that a little bit more. But I don't think a major stink is going to be raised about this. They're not going to try to prosecute Fauci, even though apparently the auto pen was involved in the pardons that were given to Fauci and some of the other COVID tyrants. I don't think they're going to be prosecuting Fauci at all, despite those things. It's not going to come to a halt that way. And I think it's for a reason. They all cover for themselves. Trump kept Fauci in the entire time. Could have fired him. He gave him a special medal at the end of his term for his service. He boasts about being the architect of Operation Warp Speed still. So, again, it's a uniparty here.
Speaking of the auto pen thing, the New York Times just uncovered emails from Biden officials in which they made executive decisions to sign certain documents. Quote, Mr. Zients hit reply all and wrote, I approve the use of the auto pen for the execution of all of the following pardons. That's a reference to Jeff Zients, the White House chief of staff. That's a sentence that no government official other than the president should ever write. The chief of staff does not have the authority to use the president's signature to pardon people. That's exactly what happened.
Yeah, it is. And the Constitution only allows the president to pardon people. He's acting as if he's like power of attorney, but there's no power of attorney clause in the Constitution, by the way. So Matt's right about that, but will they be held to account for this? I don't think they're going to be held to account for this. This is a precedent now. And by the way, any president in the future that is under kind of a debilitated state, like they're senile, like Biden so clearly was, and there's subordinates running the administration while they're in that condition, they'll point back to this and say, hey, we can just have the deep state run the presidency. They did it back here and no one was held accountable. No one said anything. Everyone basically looked the other way. That's what's going to happen.
Now, that's not to say that digital signatures shouldn't be allowed. Various outlets, including NBC News, have tried to claim that conservatives are attacking the idea of digital signatures. It's a straw man. That's not the case. If Joe Biden had said, use my auto pen to approve these pardons, there'd be no story. Okay, that's not a scandal, but that's not what happened. Instead, a bunch of aides got together, said that they heard Joe Biden authorize certain things, and then solely based on their claims about what Joe Biden wanted, they used his signature to do what they wanted.
Yeah, I heard Joe Biden wants universal vaccine mandates, by the way. I heard Joe Biden wants complete open borders. I heard Joe Biden wants to bomb North Korea tomorrow. All these things. You could do anything with the power of government if this is the precedent that stands. And that's a horrifying prospect.
Now, back to the point. Republicans are saying that this is a major scandal. I agree. It is. So then who will be held responsible? Who will be punished What person, what actual person with a face and a name are you going to arrest and put in prison for this scandal? Well, Republicans are investigating it. Great. I mean, they're constantly investigating things. The problem is that nobody is ever punished at the end of it. And I don't even think that's hyperbole. Like,
yeah, he's right. Remember when Eric Holder was held in contempt by Congress for his role in the Fast and the Furious scandal, a major scandal involving arms trafficking to Mexican cartels? That guy walks free. Remember when James Clapper lied under oath and said, hey, the NSA isn't engaging in any mass surveillance or mass data collection? And by the way, Snowden cites that as a reason that he needed to come clean on the absurdity and the unconstitutionality of this mass data collection program called PRISM within the NSA. Those guys weren't held to account. Clapper was given a major job with CNN over that. Regardless, Matt's right. They don't get held to account for this.
Nobody is ever punished at the end of any of these investigations. That's not how the Democrats operate. Democrats spent the last 4 years prosecuting Trump and throwing conservative activists and political advisors in prison. And now, even after the majority of Americans have voted for transparency and justice, we're not getting it. And that's just not going to work. It's not what any Republican voted for in the last election. Okay, we want to see accountability. We want to know that even the rich and powerful will pay for their crimes. And that hasn't happened yet. And so for a lot of people, understandably so, this Epstein stuff is kind of the last straw.
Yeah, I can see why. My comments are full of people saying, hey, I supported Trump. I bit my nose or bit my tongue and, bit the bullet, signed on that ballot that I was going to support Trump, despite having some reservations with him, only to find out he's backed out of all the greatest promises that him and his subordinates made as he came into power. Like when it came to Ukraine, when it came to bombing a new country in Iran, when it came to expanding the debt spending radically by passing the big abominable bill that adds $5 trillion worth of debt. Whether it came to being completely, on the wrong side of the issue with Musk, where he's saying that, hey, Musk is just, talking bad about the BBB now because he supports EV subsidies when Musk didn't support EV subsidies. All these things coming to a halt, but I think this is the most major. I've done polling on my page. There's a big poll out there amongst Republicans. 83% do not support how the Trump administration's handling this. This is major. I think this is the biggest potential for a schism of all that will jeopardize the rest of his agenda. So, yeah, Matt's right. This is the last straw for a lot of people.
Give us the information we've been promised. Give us the information we're entitled to. If you refuse to do that, if you insist on insulting us instead, then we're facing a much worse outcome than Democrat control of Congress in less than 2 years.
Yeah.
We're also facing a total collapse of legitimacy in our country. You can only deny reality for so long before people decide that they've had enough. And whatever donors or intelligence assets are being protected here, they're not that important. They're not worth risking a revolt. So give us the boring Epstein files, publish all the uninteresting footage you clipped out of those videos from Epstein's cell block for reasons that no one has bothered to explain. Otherwise, in the absence of transparency, people will come to their own conclusions. And when they do, whether you're a Republican or a Democrat, you won't like what happens next.
Yeah, man. Hey, there were a lot of great things that Matt said throughout the course of this entire video, but I think my favorite was there at the end when he said, there are worse things that can happen to your country than Democratic control of Congress. And, this society is so locked into tribalism in so many ways in our political system when it comes to that, where that is seen to be like the worst potential possibility, the worst potential future outcome to many Republicans. But for Matt, he just cares about this. This is a sex trafficking ring involving people of prominence, the most powerful people in the world. Former Israeli prime ministers, you have Bill Gates and Alan Dershowitz and Prince William and all these people that went out to that island. And we're just never going to get answers over it. We're never going to get answers to his intelligence connections, how he made his wealth, who his associates were, who were people that were associates but not implicated in any criminal activities. So, yeah, Matt's right about this, man. And again, he has such a good response that's so much better than a lot of the conservatives out there that are saying, well, this is just clearly the fault of the deep state. Trump's trying to do the right thing, but he's being impeded now. No, he's not. Trump is part of the cover-up. And, you know, it's just absurd. The American people are not swallowing this, especially the populist right-wingers that really believed that this was a cause for which they would support Trump, that the Epstein answers would come and they would be transparent about them. That's what we were promised. This whole PR disaster that was the conservative influencers' binders, that's insane too. So I don't think calling for the heads of Bongino or Patel or Bondi without any answers is a solution either. That's no panacea. If you're going to dismiss people without saying the reasons for which they are dismissed or what's been mishandled here, what's been bungled or withheld or twisted, and this whole hoax narrative is insane too. That was a very bad move on Trump's part. It looks like he started being too defensive. That was noticed in the first press conference. Then he started basically throwing his supporters under the bus over this, like you must be a weakling or stupid to go along with this Epstein Files thing. That was your side, Trump. So yeah, I'm with Matt Walsh here. Give us the information, no matter how boring. Let us determine whether it's boring or not, even though that's inconsequential to what most people are looking for. People are looking for answers, not entertainment. This isn't just something that the tabloids want to exist for. This is something that will expose what many believe to be an octopus and network of lies and corruption in the federal system, coated in this aura of a sex trafficking ring, but deep beneath the surface may be containing a lot more darker evils, which may involve foreign powers trying to influence the United States and its most prominent people. That's what we're looking for here. So thank you, Matt. Great response. Keep it up. I'm with you. I'm going to keep talking about the Epstein story until we get answers, if I can, or, you know, until it just seems so hopeless that it's not even worth it anymore. But I do think it's worth it. I do think the people are behind this right now, and we can't stop talking about it now. Matt was right. The best way you can convince me to keep talking about something is to tell me to stop talking about it. That's exactly right. That's exactly what they tried to do with the NSA scandal when it broke out. Just stop talking about it. This is small potatoes. No, it exposed a massive surveillance state when Snowden did what he did. So there we go. Let me know in the comments below, is Matt Walsh right about this? To what extent does this go deep into the federal system and expose treacherous people? Let me know down below. Like the video, subscribe to the channel. Subscribe to Matt too. I got to give him props just for this one. We would disagree on other issues, but man, he's heroic on this issue, so I got to give him that. And please consider becoming a YouTube member. Click the join button below. You'll help support the channel. And in return, I'll give you access to all my videos before they go live to the general public on YouTube. And until I see you guys next time, no more war, no more debt, no more inflation, and no more empire. Peace out, guys. Catch you in the next one.